In the silent sands of an ancient desert, a 5,000-year-old tomb hides a secret so mysterious that even time dared not reveal it. This isn't just another tale of mummies and pharaohs. It's a forbidden chapter of history buried deep beneath stone and silence. Welcome to Boring History, where the past whispers truths the world tried to forget. Beneath the shifting sands of an ancient desert, where the wind hums forgotten hymns through the ruins of time, a tomb was uncovered by chance, or perhaps by fate. The world above had long forgotten the man who was buried there, his name erased by both erosion and decree, his existence whispered only through half-broken inscriptions no scholar could fully translate. Yet, when the seal of his tomb cracked open, after 5,000 years of silence, the desert exhaled secrets that even the living were never meant to hear. The archaeologists who first descended into the tomb believed they were entering another royal chamber, one more stone echo of Egypt's endless dead. But almost instantly, something felt wrong. The air was thicker, not with dust alone, but with an odd metallic scent, like rain striking ancient bronze. Their torches flickered, reflecting against walls coated not in gold, but in a dark, resinous layer that seemed to swallow light. Hieroglyphs glowed faintly under the torchlight, carved deeper than usual, almost gouged into the rock. The figures they depicted were not the serene gods of afterlife or rebirth, but beings distorted. Their faces twisted, arms extended towards something unseen, and between their hands, small triangular symbols repeated again and again, forming a pattern that had never been documented in any known Egyptian text. When they moved deeper, the team found a series of stone jars arranged in a perfect circle, not the standard canopic jars used for mummified organs. These were different. Each was sealed with a layer of black pitch, and on the lid of every jar was a small human figure, sculpted crudely but eerily expressive. Their mouths were open as if in mid-scream. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Samir Al-Hadid, noted that the faces did not match the art style of the period. They looked almost modern, as if carved by someone who had seen fear itself. One jar cracked accidentally when it was lifted, releasing a dry hiss of trapped air, followed by the faint scent of burning herbs. Inside, instead of organs, lay a tightly coiled bundle of linen containing tiny bones, too small to belong to an adult. The room fell silent. No one spoke, but every pair of eyes exchanged the same unspoken realization. This was not a burial chamber for honor or remembrance. This was a chamber of offering. As they examined the sarcophagus at the center, it became clear that it wasn't crafted for one man alone. The carvings told of a ritual, a forbidden act said to awaken the hidden breath, a force that could grant kings the ability to command beyond death. Ancient texts had hinted at such rites, but always as myth, never evidence. Yet here, etched into the stone coffin itself, was a procession of masked priests, surrounding what looked like a child wrapped in ceremonial cloth, as energy spiraled upward toward a crowned figure. The figure's crown bore the same triangular sigil seen earlier, this time radiating rays of fire instead of light. The team's translator, an elderly scholar named Pharaoh, began to tremble as he whispered the words etched beneath the scene. He who takes the breath of the innocent shall live between worlds. It was not a blessing. It was a curse disguised as a promise. Around the chamber, other relics revealed themselves slowly under the sweep of their lamps. Obsidian daggers with hilts wrapped in what appeared to be braided hair. Bowls made of a strange grey stone streaked with iron, and a series of scroll fragments, so brittle they turned to dust at the faintest touch. What little could be read from them described nights without moonlight, sacrifices made under total darkness, and the belief that a shadow could be imprisoned within an object. A practice condemned even in the most heretical of ancient texts. As the hours passed, the team began to notice strange anomalies. Their compass needles spun without direction near the center of the chamber. A faint vibration pulsed through the floor, not sound, but sensation like the heartbeat of something buried deeper. Equipment batteries drained inexplicably fast, and when the photographs were developed later, several images came out blurred with streaks of light forming circular patterns identical to the ones carved on the walls. Among the relics was a stone tablet split cleanly down the middle. When pieced together, it displayed a ritual diagram, concentric circles surrounding a seated figure holding a vessel. the inscription beneath translated to something close to, "The breath returns to its keeper." What unsettled the researchers most wasn't the phrase itself, but the name signed below it, the same as a high priest known to have been executed for treason against the gods nearly 500 years after this tomb was supposedly sealed. The deeper they explored, the more the chamber seemed to defy history. Some artifacts dated centuries apart, yet all bore the same motif: the triangle, the open mouth, the black resin. It was as if multiple generations had secretly returned to this place, adding their own offerings, feeding an ancient ritual long after its official banishment. The tomb wasn't a single event frozen in time, it was a pulse, returning through ages, drawing the devout and the damned alike. In one of the innermost alcoves, they found a wall carved with no hieroglyphs at all, only the outline of a human form pressed into the stone, as though someone had been absorbed into it. Traces of gold leaf outlined the figure's eyes, and faint burn marks radiated outward from the chest area. When a flashlight beam crossed it, the shadow seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the surface was still breathing. None dared touch it. Later that night, as they documented their findings, the team's recorder captured something unintended. A whisper between the clicks of the camera shutter. At first dismissed as static, it was later enhanced in a lab. The voice, faint but undeniable, spoke in ancient Egyptian, repeating one phrase: "The offering must continue." After that discovery, no one wished to return to the tomb at night. Work resumed only under daylight, though even then, several workers refused to enter the main chamber. Some claimed to hear footsteps echoing from the sealed corridor beyond the sarcophagus. Others swore that the air smelled different every morning. Some days like incense, others like decay. The artifacts were transported carefully to the Cairo Museum, where analysis confirmed something even more disturbing. The resin covering the jars contained traces of a substance not found in any other archaeological context. A compound chemically similar to mercury sulfide, mixed with what appeared to be human blood. The mixture would have been highly toxic, suggesting that those performing the ritual may have poisoned themselves willingly as part of the offering. Even more baffling was a discovery under ultraviolet light microscopic inscriptions, hidden beneath the black coating of the relics, invisible to the naked eye. They were written in a hybrid script combining Old Egyptian with an unknown symbolic language. One phrase translated loosely to, "The breath demands balance." The rest remained indecipherable. Word of the find spread quietly through academic circles, though official reports softened the truth. The site was classified as ritualistic and non-canonical, a sterile term meant to bury the controversy. But among those who had entered the tomb, none could forget the feeling of being watched by something older than gods, something that still lingered within those relics. One technician responsible for cleaning the obsidian dagger resigned abruptly after claiming that while polishing the blade, his reflection smiled back at him though he hadn't. Another researcher reported dreams of a child standing at the foot of his bed, holding a small jar and asking, "Where is my breath?" The dreams stopped only when he left Egypt altogether. Historians later tried to trace the origins of the triangular sigil. The earliest record predating the tomb appeared in a forgotten papyrus fragment stored in the British Museum. It described a forbidden brotherhood of priests who worshipped not the sun god Ra, but the shadow beneath his light. They believed that every soul cast two reflections, one of flesh, one of essence, and that through sacrifice, the essence of one could sustain the life of another. This heresy was punishable by death, yet fragments of its doctrine appeared again and again throughout Egyptian history, hidden beneath legitimate texts. When researchers cross-referenced the hieroglyphic patterns from the tomb, they found connections stretching far beyond Egypt. Similar triangular marks were discovered in Sumerian burial artifacts, and a related motif appeared on pottery unearthed in the Indus Valley. Civilizations separated by thousands of miles, but bound by the same obsession, the transference of life through ritual death. It became clear that what was unearthed wasn't merely a tomb, it was evidence of a global current of forbidden knowledge, one that pulsed beneath the surface of humanity's earliest civilizations. The relics were not just remnants of superstition, they were tools of a forgotten science, a desperate attempt to bargain with mortality itself. Every examination led deeper into paradox. Carbon dating contradicted stratigraphy, as if time itself had bent within those walls. The bones from the jars showed genetic markers inconsistent with the surrounding population. Some were older than the tomb's estimated construction date, others were centuries younger. It was as if the ritual had reached across generations, claiming its victims over and over again. The more they studied, the more the tomb's architecture revealed a strange intelligence. The angles between corridors weren't random. They aligned perfectly with celestial coordinates that matched not the night sky of ancient Egypt, but the star positions as they would appear 5,000 years in the future. Someone, or something, had designed this tomb as a bridge between ages, a ritual site built not just for remembrance, but for return. Even the carvings on the sarcophagus lid took on new meaning under infrared imaging. Hidden beneath the original paint was another layer. Depictions of priests surrounding an orb of light suspended between their palms. One of them was painted without a face, as though erased deliberately. Yet faint brush traces suggested that his face resembled the same king buried within. A cycle of rebirth, achieved not through divine grace but through sacrifice. The idea haunted everyone who came into contact with the relics, whose life had been bought, and whose breath had been taken. The walls whispered that question, though no one could answer. Scholars debated whether the rituals described were symbolic, but the weight of physical evidence, the bones, the blood, the poison, spoke of grim reality. It wasn't just ceremony, it was transaction. As the investigation deepened, government officials sealed the site once again, citing structural instability. But those who had been there knew it was not the ceiling that was unstable. It was the air, the energy, the feeling that something beneath the earth stirred with awareness. Over time, even mention of the tomb faded from public record. Only fragments of photographs and smuggled journal entries survived, circulated quietly among those who sought patterns in ancient darkness. One such note, written in the margin of Dr. Al, had its final logbook, contained only 6 words, scrawled hastily in red ink. It still breathes beneath the resin. Under the pale light of dawn, when the first rays touched the weathered stone of the excavation site, the team began to uncover something they hadn't expected to find. Language itself, carved not to be read, but to be feared. The walls surrounding the innermost chamber were covered in symbols that defied logic. At first glance, they seemed like hieroglyphs, but their symmetry was too precise, too deliberate, and the lines bent in ways that suggested no known Egyptian hand. When the dust was brushed away, each glyph revealed tiny etchings hidden within its curves, spirals, eyes, and unending lines that seemed to fold back on themselves, creating the illusion of movement. Under torchlight, the carvings almost shimmered, as if reacting to the flame. The deeper they looked, the more alive the writing seemed to become. The scholars who entered that chamber realized quickly that these markings did not belong to any catalogued language. They bore resemblance to Sumerian cuneiform, yet carried the rhythm of Phoenician letters, combined with the sacred geometry of early Egyptian priestly codes. It was as though the builders of this tomb had merged fragments of multiple ancient tongues into something entirely their own, something crafted not for communication, but for invocation. Every inscription seemed to hum faintly when air passed over it, creating an unsettling resonance, like a chant carried through stone. When one of the researchers placed her hand against a wall, she swore she felt the vibration travel up her arm, like a heartbeat trapped within the limestone. The symbols followed no horizontal or vertical order. They spiraled outward, always leading toward the same point, a raised sigil shaped like an inverted eye. Its iris was carved so deeply that even modern tools would have struggled to achieve such precision. The surrounding inscriptions, when translated phonetically, produced a sequence of sounds that none could identify as words. But when played through a sound synthesizer, those syllables formed a pattern of tones matching a sequence used in ancient temple hymns meant to call forth the unseen. The coincidence sent a chill through the group. What if this wasn't writing at all, but music frozen in stone? Pharaoh, the translator who had once whispered of curses, began cross-referencing every known dialect in the Egyptian canon. He realized something terrifying. Each of these symbols corresponded not to an object or name, but to an act. They represented movement, direction, transformation. Verbs, not nouns. Commands, not prayers. This was not a story written on the walls. It was a set of instructions. And the more he translated, the more it became clear that these instructions were meant for those performing the rituals, not for those observing them. One sequence repeated across multiple panels read roughly as, "The shadow opens when the breath is broken." Another line, engraved at the top of the tomb's archway, seemed to mock any who dared enter, speak, and the air remembers. Linguists struggled with the concept. A language that recorded not meaning, but sound, one that might have been designed to preserve the power of spoken ritual even after millennia of silence. When they tested the acoustics, they found that the chamber's shape amplified certain frequencies to unnatural levels. A single word spoken at the right pitch could echo for minutes, looping endlessly like a whispered incantation. As they examined the sarcophagus once more, new inscriptions were discovered beneath a layer of dust and soot. These weren't carved, they were burned into the stone, as if seared by heat intense enough to melt limestone. The words were smaller, more frantic, the strokes uneven. When traced and enhanced, they appeared to be written in an older dialect, one that predated the unification of Egypt itself. The translation was partial, but the phrase was chilling. They listen even now. It became evident that the language on these walls was more than communication. It was containment. The repeated patterns of the triangular symbols formed a net of geometry designed to lock something within. Each corner of the tomb had these inscriptions etched in perfect symmetry, facing inward, converging toward the central chamber. Pharaoh noted that this configuration mirrored ancient protective sigils used to imprison malevolent spirits in Mesopotamian lore. Somehow, this burial site had borrowed from traditions thousands of miles apart. The question was, what did they try to imprison? When ultraviolet lights were applied, the invisible ink appeared again, faint red traces outlining new symbols layered over the original ones. These secondary marks had been added centuries after the initial construction, suggesting that later priests or followers had returned to reinforce the seal. It was as though they feared the language itself might weaken over time, that its silence could break. The second set of inscriptions included warnings that seemed almost desperate. The words hunger, one line read, "Do not let them sleep without offering." It was a grim reminder that the tomb may have required maintenance, not from decay, but from the need to keep its power fed. The patterns began to reveal strange consistencies, with later occult alphabets found in the Hellenistic period and early Gnostic texts. The team compared them to the so-called language of the dead, referenced in apocryphal writings from Alexandria, a language said to bridge the living and the spirits of the underworld. Scholars dismissed such connections as superstition, but those who stood in the chamber couldn't deny the magnetic pull of the symbols. They seemed to draw the gaze, making it difficult to look away. Even when photographed, the shapes produced optical illusions that caused viewers to see motion in still images. Some swore they could see the symbols pulse faintly, beating in time with their own heart. One researcher, fascinated but reckless, attempted to vocalize the sequence of sounds Pharaoh had transcribed. The first syllables echoed harmlessly, a hollow rhythm reverberating through the chamber. But by the fourth phrase, the temperature in the room dropped abruptly, their breath turning to mist. A faint pressure filled the air, and the lamps flickered out one by one. When they finally relit them, the researcher's voice was gone, reduced to a whisper for several days. He later refused to speak of what he'd felt, but his notes contained a single line written shakily. "It understood me." Every attempt to document the inscriptions digitally resulted in anomalies. Audio equipment picked up low-frequency sounds, like a steady hum too regular to be random. Some files, when analyzed, contained hidden frequencies, waveforms shaped exactly like the triangular sigils seen on the walls. It was as though the symbols themselves encoded a vibration. Ancient engineers might have understood resonance far beyond what we assume. They may have built the language to manipulate not minds, but matter. Archaeologists began to suspect that the forbidden rituals performed here relied on sound, geometry, and sacrifice, a combination of art and physics that blurred the boundary between religion and science. The language wasn't dead. It was active. Every curve and angle had purpose. The resonance of those carved lines could amplify energy, focus intention, and perhaps open something that was never meant to open. The connection between the inscriptions and the relics became undeniable. The jars and the dagger bore miniature versions of the same symbols etched into their base. When analysed under magnification, these micro-carvings were found to contain fractal-like patterns repeating endlessly inward, beyond the limits of the visible spectrum. Modern technology couldn't replicate such precision. How could a civilization 5,000 years old carve with mathematical accuracy that matched 21st century laser etching? It defied reason, yet there it was. Proof that their understanding of form and sound extended into realms long forgotten. The deeper they studied, the more contradictions appeared. One set of symbols seemed to predict stellar alignments that hadn't occurred until centuries after the tomb was sealed. Another described the voice of the dark sun, a celestial body invisible to the human eye, but said to influence the fate of kings. Astronomers compared these alignments and found an eerie match with a star cluster that would only become visible in the modern sky due to axial precession. How could an ancient culture map constellations they could not see? Unless the language itself preserved memories not of men, but of something older. As the research expanded, it attracted linguists, physicists, and even theologians. The physicists were intrigued by the possibility that the inscriptions represented harmonic frequencies. When models were created based on the spacing of the symbols, they generated standing wave patterns identical to those found in resonance chambers used for sound-based experiments. It was as if the entire tone was a vast instrument tuned to vibrate with specific frequencies. In this sense, the forbidden rituals described earlier might have involved not blood and fire alone, but vibration, a literal awakening of the dead through sound. The theologians, however, saw a darker picture. They noted that similar geometric sigils were later used by secret cults during the late dynastic era, often connected to the worship of silence, a belief that some words, once spoken, could never be unspoken, and that speech itself could bind spirits. These sects vanished mysteriously from records, erased by decree of the temples, yet here, in this tomb, their doctrine had been carved permanently into stone, immune to censorship, waiting to be rediscovered. The inscriptions surrounding the central altar told of an exchange. Braith for braith. Covenant. The words suggested that each ritual required a speaker and a listener, one from the living and one from beyond. Through speech, they became mirrors of each other. When the living voice stopped, the echo continued, becoming the voice of the dead. In this way, language served as a bridge, connecting the two realms. And if the bridge remained open too long, the echo could learn to speak back. By the final weeks of excavation, the symbols began to affect even the most skeptical researchers. Some reported hearing faint whispers in the empty chamber, voices speaking the same fragmented syllables they had been studying. One night, a guard stationed at the site claimed he saw the carvings glow faintly, not with reflected light, but from within, as though the stone itself remembered the rituals performed upon it. He resigned the next morning. Pharaoh grew increasingly obsessed, spending hours copying the inscriptions by hand. His notes became erratic, filled with partial translations and references to living words. When questioned, he insisted that the symbols rearranged themselves when left unobserved. His colleagues dismissed it as exhaustion, but when they returned to the chamber, they found several markings subtly different. A curve extended, a line shifted, enough to raise suspicion that either someone had tampered with them, or the stone itself was changing. Eventually, the study was halted. The authorities declared the site too unstable for continued access. The final photographs were locked away, many corrupted by inexplicable static lines resembling the very shapes of the inscriptions. Pharaoh disappeared soon after, his journal found abandoned at his home. The last page contained a drawing of the inverted eye sigil and the words, "It spoke my name." Years later, when digital scans of the carvings were re-examined by modern linguists, they found patterns consistent with binary logic, a sequence of dual opposites encoded thousands of years before binary code was invented. Some researchers speculated that the language might not just be spiritual, but computational. A primitive attempt to encode thought, to transfer consciousness. Others warned that interpreting it might repeat the same mistakes of the ancients, awakening something long sealed by their own fear. The truth remained buried in the walls, the mysterious symbols that defied all translation, the hum that lingered after every whispered word, the sense that these inscriptions were not meant to tell a story, but to continue it eternally, waiting for someone reckless enough to finish the sentence carved 5,000 years ago, the one that was never meant to be read aloud under the dim glow of the lanterns, as the last grains of sand were brushed away from the tomb's entrance. The team came to a realization that chilled them deeper than the desert night ever could. This place was alive in ways they did not understand. Not alive in the sense of motion or breath, but alive as a presence and intelligence lingering, observing, reacting. It was the hidden curse, the silent observer that had claimed lives, corrupted minds, and twisted history itself. From the moment the first stone was shifted, a subtle shift rippled through the air, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to those who had spent their lives among antiquities. The walls seemed to pulse, and the faint metallic scent from earlier began to thicken, like blood mingling with incense, a signal that the tomb had sensed them, weighed them, and decided to record their intrusion. As the archaeologists moved deeper, they noted small anomalies. Their tools became unreliable, compasses spun wildly, as if the earth beneath had lost its magnetic direction. Cameras captured strange streaks of light, like ethereal fingers reaching across frames. Some of the team reported hearing faint whispers behind them when no one was near, yet the language was unrecognizable. Others felt cold spots, localized and sudden, like breath from an unseen mouth, brushing against the back of their necks. These experiences were dismissed at first as fatigue, but when repeated night after night by multiple witnesses, skepticism waned. The tomb itself seemed to resist observation, as if protecting secrets that could not survive the scrutiny of the living. In one chamber, a mosaic of symbols sprawled across the floor, depicting figures in dynamic poses surrounding an indistinct central form. When traced carefully, the figures appeared to be engaged in motion, a dance of sacrifice and offering. Yet the central form remained blank, like a void, absorbing attention without revealing itself. The team theorized that it represented a deity, a concept, or perhaps a person lost to time. When one researcher accidentally stepped upon the mosaic, the air changed, a low hum vibrated through the soles of their feet, reverberating upward into the skull. A sense of unease settled over the group, as if the tomb itself had reacted to their intrusion, noting the disruption of its carefully preserved rituals. Artifacts scattered throughout the chamber were equally unnerving. Jars with lids carved into screaming faces, knives etched with geometric patterns, and bowls containing residues that defied chemical analysis, all suggested that the rituals performed here had a purpose beyond conventional understanding. Some of the bones discovered were remarkably well preserved, despite millennia passing. Analysis revealed traces of a substance that may have been used to halt decay, yet it bore no resemblance to known embalming techniques. It was as if those who had been placed here were preserved not for honor, but to serve some ongoing function, part of a cycle that continued long after death. The sarcophagus at the chamber's heart drew the greatest attention. Unlike typical tombs, it bore no inscriptions identifying the deceased. Instead, it was carved with twisting lines and symbols, radiating outward in fractal patterns that seemed to repeat infinitely when observed closely. Infrared and ultraviolet scans revealed hidden layers beneath the visible carvings, small etchings resembling eyes, mouths, and hands, some grotesque, some almost human. It was as if multiple generations had returned to the tomb, adding layers of protective or controlling symbols to ensure that whatever rested within remained contained. Those who lingered near the sarcophagus reported sudden dizziness, a sense of vertigo, as though gravity itself was uneven. Objects left on the stone surface occasionally shifted slightly overnight, though there was no evidence of wind or animal activity. One researcher, while documenting the sarcophagus, claimed he heard the faint scraping of nails against stone, followed by a whisper in his native tongue asking, "Why are you here?" He was not alone in hearing such phenomena. Multiple team members reported similar incidents, always personal, always directed, as though the tomb recognized each individual intruder. The presence of the curse seemed to extend beyond physical sensations. Dreams became a nightly torment for those involved. Researchers described being chased through endless corridors lined with the same cryptic symbols, hearing the faint laughter of children, seeing faces in stone that moved subtly when unobserved. Some experienced vivid visions of rituals performed in the tomb, witnessing events that had taken place centuries before, and occasionally predicting events they could not possibly have known. Sleep deprivation became common as the mind resisted rest in an effort to process these incursions. Attempts to remove artifacts met with resistance beyond simple logistics. Jars and daggers refused to be lifted by normal means. Ropes frayed and splintered without reason. Tools broke under minimal pressure. When some objects were transported outside the tomb, reports of accidents increased. Equipment failures, minor injuries, inexplicable illnesses. Even the air around the artifacts carried an oppressive weight, a lingering sense that the curse followed those who tried to move or study the relics without understanding. It was as if the tomb had extended its influence beyond its walls, anchoring itself to anyone who dared to disturb it. The inscriptions within the tomb played a key role in the curse. The spiraling symbols, initially thought to be decorative, seemed to create a network of energy channels. When the correct combinations of symbols were activated through touch, sound, or even proximity, the ambient sensations intensified. Some scholars hypothesized that the ancient builders had discovered a form of psychoactive architecture, manipulating perception and neurology to create fear, reverence, and obedience simultaneously. The curse, therefore, was not merely mystical, it functioned as a psychological mechanism designed to maintain the sanctity and secrecy of the tomb across millennia. Chemical analysis revealed another layer of danger. Some surfaces bore microscopic traces of compounds resembling mercury, arsenic, and other substances long known for their toxicity. Exposure levels were low but persistent, enough to explain sudden headaches, nausea, and other ailments among team members. The combination of physical, chemical, and psychological factors suggested a deliberate design to protect the tomb's secrets, an early warning system for intruders. As documentation progressed, subtle interactions with the artifacts became evident. Cameras and recording devices would fail, then later show distortions suggestive of movement within empty frames. Lights would dim or flare in patterns, corresponding to the symbols etched nearby. One night, a recording captured an ethereal humming, continuous and tonal, rising in pitch as if responding to the presence of the archaeologists. The team was unable to replicate or explain the sound, though it matched perfectly the harmonic structure suggested by the carvings. A resonance that seemed designed to interact with human consciousness. Cultural records provided further context. Ancient texts referred to guardians of the threshold, beings tasked with ensuring that forbidden knowledge remained hidden. While these were often dismissed as myth, their descriptions bore uncanny resemblance to the anomalies experienced in the tomb. The walls, the air, the artifacts, and the inscriptions all acted in concert, creating a multi-dimensional defense system that combined physical, spiritual, and psychological components. The curse was not a single entity, but a layered mechanism, each aspect reinforcing the other, a sophisticated construct of protection and fear. Personal accounts of interactions with the curse grew increasingly severe. One researcher reported seeing the face of a child pressed against the walls, whispering indistinctly, vanishing whenever approached. Another described shadows moving independently of light sources, always in the corner of vision, never fully visible. Fear escalated to obsession. Some team members refused to enter certain sections of the tomb, while others felt compelled to linger, drawn as though by invisible hands. The curse seemed to selectively influence behavior, amplifying natural instincts to ensure compliance with its ancient purpose. Attempts to replicate the tomb's effects in controlled conditions failed, suggesting that the curse was intricately linked to its location. The arrangement of chambers, the orientation to celestial bodies, the precise composition of materials, all appeared essential to the manifestation of phenomena. Removing artifacts or symbols from context reduced their effects, yet traces of influence followed those who interacted with them, implying a residual energy that could persist independently. The curse was therefore both spatially bound and knowable, tied to objects and sights simultaneously. As months passed, the psychological toll became evident. Researchers experienced chronic anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and vivid hallucinations. Dreams often mirrored the tomb's interior, featuring endless corridors and spiraling symbols. Some began to believe that the tomb communicated through their subconscious, guiding, warning, or perhaps manipulating intentions. Attempts to rationalize or debunk these experiences were undermined by repeated unexplainable events, lights, sounds, movements, that continued without logical cause. The more the team interacted with the tomb, the more the curse seemed to evolve. Minor incidents, an object displaced, a symbol traced incorrectly, were followed by intensified manifestations, sudden gusts of cold air, whispered voices, even fleeting glimpses of figures not present. It became clear that the tomb was reactive, monitoring actions and adjusting its responses to maintain control. The curse was not static, it learned, adapted, and perhaps even remembered. When some artifacts were temporarily removed for laboratory analysis, devices measured unusual electromagnetic readings emanating from their surfaces. The frequency patterns were irregular, yet rhythmic, suggesting a non-random energy source. Researchers speculated that the ancient builders may have understood principles now only vaguely grasped by modern science, perhaps tapping into resonant energy fields, geomagnetic lines, or even psychic phenomena to animate the tomb's defenses. Even communication with the outside world was affected. Emails sent describing the tomb were intercepted by local authorities for review. Photographs corrupted in transit, files disappeared inexplicably. Team members began to suspect that the curse had extended beyond physical space, influencing not just their perception, but digital representation and human communication. In this way, the tomb maintained secrecy through multiple layers of interaction: mental, physical, and technological. Efforts to fully map the curse proved daunting. Subtle interactions, unpredictable manifestations, and layered effects made quantification difficult. Researchers began referring to the phenomena as a living mechanism, a system that combined architecture, symbolism, ritual, and environmental manipulation. Every aspect of the tomb seemed meticulously calculated to ensure that forbidden knowledge remained inaccessible to those unprepared to encounter it. Even the most skeptical members came to respect the tomb's power. Attempts to remove, photograph, or analyze artifacts were tempered with ritualistic care, acknowledging that the tomb operated on principles far beyond standard archaeology. It was a place where human curiosity collided with ancient intelligence, and survival depended on understanding boundaries set millennia before. Reports from later expeditions documented increasingly bizarre occurrences. Reflections in mirrors showing the tomb's interior when none should exist, faint laughter echoing through empty corridors, and sudden feelings of vertigo when near certain inscriptions. These effects were selective, personal, and unpredictable, suggesting that the curse could adapt to individual sensitivity, reinforcing the notion that it was an intelligent force embedded within the tomb itself. The tomb, it became apparent, had been constructed not just to house the dead, but to manipulate those who dared approach, to test, punish, or indoctrinate. Artifacts, inscriptions, and architecture formed a triad of defense, ensuring that any intrusion resulted in measurable consequences. Even the act of observation itself could trigger the curse, highlighting a sophisticated understanding of perception and human behavior by its creators. As the investigation progressed, it was clear that the hidden curse was more than superstition. It was a multi-dimensional mechanism, psychological, physical, and metaphysical. Those who studied it were both witnesses and participants in a millennia-old ritual, unwitting actors in a performance designed to preserve forbidden knowledge. The tomb's influence extended beyond its walls, leaving marks on memory, behavior, and even technology. It was as if the tomb itself had agency, responding to each intrusion with precision and purpose, ensuring that the forbidden secrets it contained remained beyond the reach of the uninitiated, that its power endured across time and space, shaping human experience in subtle yet undeniable ways.